to the Rockies, so we aren't going to be doing too much riding for the next few months. But I really enjoyed making that last video, so I'm going to try and make another one for a trip that we took some years ago. It was quite an exciting trip. We enjoyed it a lot, but we did not take videos on the trip, only still photos. So I'm going to get kind of fancy this time. I've been watching public television for a lot of years, and there's a guy named Ken Burns on there that did documentaries with only old photographs to use as media. So I'm going to take a page out of his book and try and make a video from our still photographs for you and tell our story. So if you're up for that, let's take a ride down old Route 66. Officially, the number 66 designation was assigned to the road running from Chicago to Los Angeles in the summer of 1926. The final section of the original road was bypassed by the interstate system in 1984. Between those years, the road became the most famous and storied road in America. That's the route we want to take. We live in northern Colorado. The closest location for us to reach this old route would be in Albuquerque, about halfway between Chicago and Los Angeles. To get to Albuquerque, we had to ride through most of beautiful old Colorado. From Albuquerque, we head west across New Mexico, Arizona, and California to Santa Monica, the official end of the road. To return home, we didn't want to retrace our path, so we traveled up California Highway 1 along the Pacific coast to Oregon. Then back east through Oregon, Idaho, Wyoming, and home to Colorado. We covered almost 3,000 miles in all sorts of roads, in stifling heat and freezing cold, and we enjoyed every minute of it. We hope you will too. Right off the bat, you'll notice this is not the bike that we had in the last video. We ride a 2015 KTM 1190 today. At the time of this trip, however, we still rode our old 1974 Kawasaki Z900. We bought the 900 new, and it had put thousands of miles on it, but it was destroyed during a wildfire in 2012. We were already in our late 60s by then and decided that the loss of our trusty riding companion was probably a sign that we should retire from motor touring altogether. But fortunately, that wasn't in the cards. You can read the whole story in the About section on our YouTube channel. We could talk forever about beautiful Colorado and its colorful history, but this story is really about Route 66. So we'll fast forward to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where we stopped to see our nephew Mitch. The original Route 66 ran through Santa Fe. However, during the nearly 60 years of its existence, US 66 was under constant change. So we ended up following parts of Route 66 rather than a continuous road. For instance, in Albuquerque, the route changed over the years so that at one point you could actually stop at an intersection where the later route crossed the earlier one. There are fewer and fewer examples of the iconic architecture that developed along the route to accommodate the early travelers. Gas stations, auto courts, and the fast food restaurant were first created on Route 66 and later proliferated throughout the United States. The Alvado Auto Court, built in 1937, is one of the earlier and best preserved of the earliest auto courts, as is the Blue Swallow Motel in Tucumcari, built in 1939. We camped wherever possible. The old Kawasaki, 30 years old at this point, had no problem carrying Nicki, myself, and our gear. We took intentional detours to see sites near but not on the original Route 66. Chaco Canyon is a national park slightly north of Route 66. Its people flourished between 850 and around 1200 AD. There are just enough unanswered questions about why it was built and how it was used to give it an air of mystery. It's so far away from any metropolitan area that light pollution is non-existent, and we saw more stars camping overnight there than anywhere else we've been. My most vivid memory of the place, however, was the 20-mile dirt road we had to take to get there. We actually rattled the headlight and a turn signal off the bike on that road. There can be extremely strong winds out of the west in this area of the country. After leaving Chaco, we drove near Farmington and took a north to south route that gave us a consistently strong crosswind for 135 miles. To stay on the road, we had to lean the bike into the wind at a 30 to 40 degree angle. An RV had part of its side blown off. By the time we arrived in Gallup, we were totally exhausted, and instead of camping, we crashed in a cheap motel. It wasn't even a relic of the Route 66 heyday. We took another detour off of our route when we entered Arizona's Canyon de Chelly National Monument. The National Park Service says that people have lived in these canyons for nearly 5,000 years, longer than anyone has lived uninterrupted anywhere on the Colorado Plateau. Canyon de Chelly is owned by the Navajo Nation and co-managed with the National Park Service. Access to the canyon floor is restricted, and visitors are allowed to travel in the canyons only when accompanied by a park ranger or an authorized Navajo guide. Twister's is a 1950s style soda fountain to which we can attest makes the greatest chocolate malts. They even have classic cars in their parking lot. Much of Route 66 was based on older roads and trails. In 1838, the Cherokee were forcibly removed by U.S. troops and made to trek west to the Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears. In 1853, a wagon train was commissioned by the Army that was also an experiment testing the feasibility of using camels as pack animals. In 1928, runners traversed the length of Route 66, some 2,400 miles, as part of a coast-to-coast 3,400-mile marathon from Los Angeles to New York, called the Bunyan Derby. US 66 became the first highway to be completely paved in 1938. Several places were dangerous. One section through the Black Mountains outside of Oatman, Arizona, was fraught with hairpin turns and was the steepest along the entire route. So much so that some early travelers, too frightened at the prospect of driving such a potentially dangerous road, hired locals to navigate the winding grade. That part of the road is still there, and although it was exciting to ride, we didn't have to hire a local. Oatman was chosen for the name of the town in honor of Olive Oatman, a young Illinois girl who had been taken captive by Indians during her pioneer family's journey westward in 1851 and forced into slavery. The Oatman Hotel is known as the honeymoon stop for Clark Gable and Carole Lombard after their wedding in Kingsman on March 18, 1939. Gable fell in love with the area and returned often to play poker with the miners. Oatman's most famous attractions are its wild burros, which freely roam the town streets and can be hand-felled hay cubes, otherwise known as burro chow, readily available in practically every store in town. As we moved from Arizona into California, we hit the Mojave Desert. The Mojave Desert is an arid rain shadow desert and the driest desert in North America. Its boundaries are generally noted by the presence of Joshua trees, which are native only to the Mojave Desert, and it is believed to support an additional 1,750 to 2,000 species of plants. The Mojave Desert receives less than 2 inches of rainfall a year and is generally between 2,000 and 5,000 feet in elevation. It's not a good place to have a breakdown. but the old Kawasaki roared through it with no difficulty. I loved that bike. We had planned this trip in order to attend a wedding in Santa Monica. Our niece rented a house in Venice right next to the famous Venice Beach for us all to stay at. Originally called Venice of America, Venice was founded in 1905 by tobacco millionaire Abbot Kinney. He constructed the area in beachy marshland, and for that, many called it Kinney's Folly. Despite the non-believers, Kinney dredged the land and built a system of canals navigated by gondoliers. The pier he erected boasted carnival attractions like roller coasters and fun houses, a ballroom, cafes, and later an aquarium. The rise and fall and rise again of Venice is a fascinating story too long to tell here, but I've included a link to an article and an old video that you should definitely take a look at. You'll find the link below this video. From Venice, we headed north on another historic highway. Much like Route 66, California State Route 1 was associated with a sense of freedom. This road was one of America's most scenic highways. It stretched for over 650 miles, providing travelers with unparalleled views of the ocean. Construction of the road began in 1919 with some labor provided by inmates from the nearby San Quentin prison, who exchanged work for shorter sentences. Locals also worked on the road, including a young John Steinbeck, who would often set his writings along Highway 1 and the towns dotting the route. The road was finished in 1937, becoming the first complete north-south highway in California. It connected the beaches of South California with the redwoods of North California, cutting through both small towns and large metropolitan areas, much like Route 66. The famous Bixby Rainbow Bridge is one of the most recognized sites on the route. 825 trucks brought 6,600 cubic yards of concrete and 600,000 pounds of reinforcing steel to construct this bridge. Already one of the richest men in America thanks to his newspaper empire, William Randolph Hearst got even richer when his mother died in 1919, leaving him the sole heir to the family's mining fortune. Along with other properties, he inherited 250,000 acres of hilly ranch land along the California coast. Hearst used the ranch land and his stockpile of money to build the 165-room estate that came to be known as Hearst Castle. It took 28 years, but Hearst built a castle that includes 127 acres of garden, walkways, swimming pools, and a zoo. It was also technically never finished due to Hearst's death in 1947. The road along the Rogue River in southwest Oregon is a wonderful place to ride. Known for its salmon runs, whitewater rafting, and rugged scenery, it was one of the original 8 rivers named in the Wild and Scenic River Act of 1968. We found eastern Oregon was generally hot and dry, but the Craters of the Moon National Monument in Idaho is worth a stop. Craters of the Moon is in south-central Idaho, midway between Boise and Yellowstone National Park. The 60 distinct solidified lava flows that form the Craters of the Moon lava field range in age from 15,000 to just 2,000 years old, and only have a seasonal and very sparse cover of vegetation. From a distance, this cover disappears almost entirely, giving an impression of utter black desolation. The most beautiful sight on our trip home was Grand Teton National Park. Grand Teton, the highest mountain in the park, abruptly rises more than 7,000 feet above the mountain valley Jackson Hole, almost 850 feet higher than Mount Owen, the second highest summit in the range. The park has numerous lakes, including 15-mile-long Lake Jackson, as well as streams of various lengths and the upper main stem of the Snake River. Some of the rocks in the park are the oldest found in an American national park and have been dated at nearly 2.7 billion years. We had been on the road for almost a month by now, much of it camping, and we were ready for home. We took a couple of more photos here in the Tetons, and then we made a beeline for Colorado. Despite a slideshow instead of a video, I hope you found this trip interesting. Our next videos will return to historic topics, and we'll experiment with some new video techniques. We love sharing our adventures with you, and we hope you'll join us again. Thanks. Route 66 was planned to run through small rural towns from Chicago to Los Angeles. During the Depression, thousands of unemployed young men were put to work on the road, which wasn't completely paved until 1938. John Steinbeck made it famous when he named it the Mother Road in his 1939 novel The Grapes of Wrath. The federal government invested $70 billion in capital projects in the Los Angeles and San Diego area during World War II, and Route 66 transported thousands of people in the area from the rest of the country. After the war, the road allowed many military personnel and families to migrate from northern cities with harsh winters to the more temperate west and southwest. To accommodate them, businesses such as gas stations and motels developed and grew along the route.